Yes, absolutely. Certainly, in some regards, social media plays a very important role for opposition candidates, particularly in countries where the traditional media might be somewhat controlled by the governments.
Yeah. So take us through exactly what happened here. So the first issue was that Twitter, Instagram, other social media sites, some Google sites as well, restricted the use of the government when it comes to election propaganda. According to the information that we have here, Digital Forensic Lab started doing this research when there was targeted almost intimidation towards, as you say, the presidential candidate Bobby Wine.
That is correct in a way. So I originally started doing an investigation into suspicious accounts back in November when I noticed that there was a network of accounts that were spreading old images from protests, say from 2011 or 2013, and they were saying that this is evidence of Bobby Wine supporters being hooligans and violent thugs. So I started doing my investigation, and we are partnered at the Digital Forensic Research Lab. We're partnered with Facebook. So I sent through some data to them, and they then did their own independent investigation. And they discovered that this network of accounts were engaging in something called coordinated inauthentic behavior, which means that they were working together to try and deceive and try and influence public debate ahead of the election. And they also came to the conclusion that this network was connected with the Ministry of Information, Communication and Technology.
I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? That this whole network of sites and essentially misinformation is linked to the government.
It is quite big news, definitely.
So, in terms of what happens now, obviously the Ugandan government has taken the stance of tit for tat. If we're going to be restricted, the people in our country are going to be restricted as well. What does that mean now for the days, the hours now leading up to the election?
Well, in particular, it means that people are not able to share information with one another. Citizen journalism can't happen. People can't send a WhatsApp message and say, this voting poll is full. There is police violence in this area. And it's essentially a shutdown of the sharing of information. You know, we saw it in Tanzania as well. They did a similar thing, and it prevented citizens from engaging with one another, and it also prevented opposition leaders from sharing information.
And I suppose most importantly, there is an element of oversight that is lost with this lack of information between citizens.
There definitely is. It's certainly just making it harder for Uganda to have free and fair elections. I think free and fair elections in 2021 involves social media to a large extent, just because that's how a large proportion of the citizenry actually communicate with one another.
So, Tessa, I mean, what does this mean for issues like, this week we also saw US President Donald Trump being banned from Twitter. And there are several arguments now about the rights of Twitter to stop his right to freedom of speech. He has a base, as we know, of more than 70 million people, shall we say, if we look at the voter numbers in the US. I mean, it's an incredible amount of power given to organizations like Facebook and Twitter. But at the same time, it's the responsibility of Facebook and Twitter as well to monitor how their platforms are used and what they are used for.
Definitely the debates around the responsibilities of these platforms are incredibly polarizing. Some people say that they should not censor, but they should be better at taking down and preventing the spread of what is clearly disinformation or false information spread with the intent to deceive. And then there are people on the other side who think that this is censorship and people on social media should be allowed to say whatever they want. With regards to this network, Facebook removed the accounts because they were engaging in coordinated inauthentic behavior. So they were actually creating fake and duplicate accounts that they were using to amplify statuses and content from different groups. So they were banned because they were engaging in something that Facebook clearly lays out as going against their guidelines.
I mean, this term that was invented essentially by Facebook, coordinated inauthentic behavior, it says it describes when groups of pages or people work together to mislead others about who they are or what they are doing. At the same time, though, Tessa, Twitter has had numerous opportunities to ban, for example, again, US President Donald Trump for this very issue. Groups of people working together to mislead others about who they are, about what they're doing. The president himself constantly talking about so-called alternative facts. I mean, it's fair to say that Twitter also benefited from having someone like Donald Trump on its platform.
I think you definitely could say that. Banning someone like Donald Trump, who has a huge following and is also a political leader, would most likely be construed as a political move. So we have seen platforms in the past, like Reddit, for example, remove Donald Trump related content. And ultimately what happens is that the people who set up accounts just migrate to different platforms, which is not necessarily what these large platforms want. So it's one seen as a political move because and these platforms want to try and be as neutral as possible. And two, it can result in a loss of users.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they are well and truly in the political fray. Tessa, thanks very much for your time this morning on the AM Report. Tessa Knight is a research assistant with Digital Forensic Lab. And this, actually, we were talking about the story in Uganda, where the government there has now restricted the use of platforms like Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, Instagram, and some Google servers. And that's in retaliation to the government itself being banned from those platforms.